Hey, I'm so excited to share this interview with you. It's featuring TJ Fairchild, the CEO of Commonplace Coffee. We talk about his humble origins to building a 9-location mini coffee empire, the wholesaling business, the influence of Italian-made equipment, and much, much more. It's one of my all-time favorite coffee shops. Hannah and I have taken so many meetings there, so it was a pleasure to get to talk with him. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I'm excited to be talking with you.
Thanks for inviting me.
So this is a little bit deeper than I would usually start a podcast interview, but a piece of content that you put out opened the door for me. If you found out that you were going to die in one day and you had to figure out how to spend that day, what is an activity that you would want to take up part of that last day?
Wow, how did I start this?
You posted on LinkedIn about working behind the counter and how that was one of the things you'd want to do.
That's where I thought you were going, and really I did have kind of an epiphany moment a few weeks ago working behind the bar in the Mexican War Streets. We had a client up from Miami, so I needed to kind of be hovering around to be available in case things got too busy, because some of my staff at the Mexican War Streets Commonplace were working with him. So I volunteered to jump on bar, which I don't get to do every day. And I just had that moment in the middle of having the bar experience of just being overwhelmed of, I can't believe you started with this. It's amazing. You did it. You got to me. I don't know. I was meeting people that I hadn't met before. I was seeing people that I hadn't seen in a year and a half because of the pandemic. And it was just overwhelming. It was exactly why Julie and I opened Commonplace in the beginning. We were connecting with people and having this moment. And then I was also in that kind of frame of mind, helping with this client, seeing my staff kind of evolving in their positions as well, helping to train this client. It was one of those moments where I got in my car to drive home, and it was overwhelming. And I realized in that moment, I'm doing exactly what I would want to do on the last day of my day on Earth. And did you have a more specific question about that? I feel like there was some. Did you say how I would spend the day?
Well, yeah, how you would spend the day. I'm maybe that would be all 24 hours or every allotted waking moments. You've got family, so I'd imagine that they would be incorporated somewhere there. But
absolutely,
I think it's fascinating. I think most people would struggle to answer that, mostly because they probably aren't considering that. Although you could argue they should be.
I'm overwhelmed by that question. I wouldn't say over every day, and I'm not overwhelmed in the sense of like I can't process it, but it's just moments will happen in my life, and I'll think of like a movie that brought me there, or maybe just the question as I'm driving and I have some free time with my space or with my head, and my brain space just goes to that question of like, what would I really want to do? Like, what's the last thing I kind of want to go out with? And I don't know why I do that, but I just do it a lot. So it was fun to have a moment in my work. You know, I'm technically clocked in at this moment, having this moment of connection and understanding. This is really what I love to do with my life. And of course, my family is a huge priority. I would put high on the list taking a bicycle ride with my family. I can't get over how much joy that brings me to have all 5 of us out on a trail, other than we have to leave our dogs. So if you have any ideas of how to take our dogs bicycling.
How big are they?
I have a 90-pound and a 20-pound dog. So
I could see the 90-pound could probably like keep up at least for a while, but other people might get uncomfortable. That's the only consideration I would say there.
Right. Yeah, we ride on pretty narrow trails, so I don't know that we'd have good space to have the dog set up next to us. But
one of my all-time favorite memories was a dog that's now passed, but we took her up to Seven Springs, where there's some mountain biking trails. And the family that we went with, they also had a dog, and there was 4 of us biking and the 2 dogs, and the dogs would just take off away from the trails. But the one dog who was used to going mountain bike with him, whistle, they'd come crashing through the woods. And I can't remember which book it was. Maybe it was Call of the Wild, where they talked about like the dogs that were like laughing or like really expressing these emotions. And maybe when I was younger, I just wasn't cognizant of the dog having that kind of emotional range. But you saw them in their element while we were just raring through the woods like that. And it is completely unambiguous that those dogs were in heaven. There was nothing they would rather be
Right.
doing, giving them more joy. Sounds like a little bit like you when you're biking with your fam.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, let's take it back then. So you talked about why you wanted to get into the coffee business. It was clear to you. You were reflecting on it. Man, this is exactly why we started. But like, let's take it back to 2003 and give people a little bit more of a picture of the genesis point of starting a coffee shop, what it entailed, what challenges there were, and what the why was.
That's a great question. The why for coffee in general was that we just loved the beverage. We loved what it produces, just like what we're doing now, seated at a table and allowing thoughts and connection and finding out about each other. And that has always appealed to me since I was a child. I grew up drinking coffee, stealing coffee from my mom's cup, or I grew up in Rhode Island, and the state drink is coffee milk, which was on all the kids' menus. It's a milk beverage that they just add coffee syrup to, just like you would chocolate syrup to make chocolate milk. And still the only place you can buy coffee syrup is in Rhode Island. And it's one of our treats. We get to go in 2 weeks, so I'll get some coffee milk and I'll bring or coffee syrup and bring it back to you, and you can try it if you'd like.
Yeah.
Not as much my favorite anymore, but it's still a nostalgic point. So coffee was always a big part of our lives, but in college we were confronted with like coffee house culture, and I described the first time I walked into a coffee house in Raleigh, North Carolina, called Cup of Joe in I think 1994. Having this kind of epiphany moment of like, wow, I've made it home. I finally found the place that like I don't feel a little bit out of place. So, I felt really at home in this space, and it was a 90s second wave coffee shop with smoking section. I mean, much different than a coffee house necessarily would be today, but that overall feel just appealed to me so much. So Julie and I grew as coffee hobbyists during college and also worked at coffee bars. I actually got a job at Cup of Joe, and my wife did as well. And when we graduated from college and went to grad school, we worked in coffee again. And, it was always like this side thing, but it was such an important part of my life. And when we were done with grad school, we kind of lacked direction. The thing that I had gone to grad school for kind of wasn't appealing to me anymore. Finished the degree, didn't really want to continue in academia, but knew coffee was such a big part of my life. And, the long story short is Indiana, Pennsylvania found us as coffee hobbyists. And when it found us, it presented to us a closed former cafe. So it was ridiculously easy to start a coffee shop because the plumbing and electrical was done, bathrooms were done, it'd been inspected as a health facility, a food facility. So we took the plunge. It was almost like accidental and not well thought out. We bootstrapped it with a little bit of cash from some friends and family, and we started with no expectation, almost an expectation to fail. And I don't think I would say it like that, March of 2003, but I definitely believe I didn't have a future to look at and say, this is what I want to be doing in 5 years, 10 years. It was an expectation that there would be another pivot in my life, and it didn't happen.
And why not?
Why I thought we would fail is just because I didn't have a solid plan. Why not is because it worked. Not only did we start a coffee shop and, again, the priority was the table. The priority was the people, the engagement. Coffee was always a hobby and important, but people were the forefront, and it worked. Our desire to connect with people worked, whether it was a one-on-one relationship with a guest or with the staff or with our vendors. I mean, I'm so excited to say that, we've been open 18 years. We've had the same milkman that delivers our milk in our store. And I started my day this morning in a shop that has been open since the very beginning. Like, that's been ridiculously important to us. And that just worked. the human connections worked, and it caused us to network and try other things with our business and get into roasting and get into helping other people open coffee shops that turned into us establishing other retail spaces.
Beautiful. So I want to get into the consulting with other people that are opening coffee shops, but I want to table that to just even maybe give some people some basics of coffee business generally. I know that you guys are wholesaling. I've seen the packages. You've done different collabs where someone can get some Commonplace Coffee, and it's the Shenley Park or the Frick Park collab bag. But at its core, a coffee shop, if you're starting that for the first time, it's basically, correct me if I'm wrong, how many feet are coming in the door to buy a cup, because there's, a marginal cost to brew the coffee, a marginal cost to get that cardboard, paper, plastic, whatever the cup was, a material, and the labor involved to make that a reality. And you get enough of those with the margin of a coffee cup, and you're not going to fail, right?
Absolutely.
A little bit of rent. What else is there? What else, other considerations that might people overlook?
I mean, I would consider having a quality coffee bean, but you're absolutely right. Feet in the door is crucial. If you don't have X number of people based on what your overhead capture is going to be, your total list of liabilities, then you can never get it. And the opposite's true too. You could have the most amazing, no overhead, low rent, but even with the amount of people it would take to get that capture, you're not going to get enough revenue to keep that project going. So one thing that we always talk about is making sure that all of your liabilities are in conjunction to what you expect your gross sales are, or what your expectation of the people that are going to walk through your door. You've got to be where the people are. And as sad as it is, I used to argue all the time that quality is what sold coffee, but really convenience is what sells coffee. If you're not around where people are, there's no way, even with that marginal cost, of the product and the things that you have to use as consumables with that product, you don't have the people there, you're not going to hit it, because not only is it marginal cost, you're also marginal revenue total. Great profit margin, but it's all at low ticket value. So you just have to have a lot of people, or else you'll never hit your money to continue.
And another analogy that I've heard, you can push back on this if you don't agree with it, but you can say over the last decade there's been this co-working run up, culminating with the WeWork IPO fiasco. And for the folks that are unfamiliar with co-working, it's, hey, we're going to give you this maybe day rate or week rate or month rate to have a desk or a series of desks. And you're basically getting the macro piece of real estate for a per square foot lower cost than you're charging, and that's where your margin comes from. And someone once argued that a coffee shop could be seen in a similar way, because there's plenty of people that come into that coffee shop to sit and read, sit and work, and the little bit of square footage that they might occupy is, instead of a rent payment, is in the form of that payment for the cup of joe, which might be free if you go into WeWork. Did you ever think about it that way? Does that seem like a fair analogy, or not quite?
I mean, I think about it from the operational side. Like, do I want squatters is what, sometimes what's called, or do I want folks that are using coffee shops as an office? Like, we think about it from an operational standpoint. Will this get in the way of our project, our overall project, if really what we're desiring is conversation and connectedness in a shop? Do we want individuals on laptops? But I think what you're asking for is more of like the business model aspect, and not from an operational standpoint.
I think both of those are tied together, though, right? Because I'm coming at it as an outsider, maybe overly financialized, overly formulaic, and you're the operator. You're the person that has the 9 locations, that's actually capable of building a mini coffee empire here. I've got no such bona fide. So I want to know how you think about it. I don't want to just have my perspective validated.
Okay. The way I think about it is, it's my fault if I haven't selected an amazing enough location to get the revenue capture that I need from the total feet in the door. I always want space for people to occupy the coffee house, whether it's for work, for silent reading, for connecting with a friend. So whether or not I see like the economics not working for that specific part of real estate in my shop, or whether I see that as like, oh no, here comes more co-working space, am I going to be out of business? Those just don't seem like concerns to me, because if I've found the right location, I'm going to have a healthy enough mix between people that walk through the door, that get a coffee and are just going to leave and walk their dog or go back to work or go back home or whatever their next part of their day is, with a healthy mix of people hanging out and spending time there and using the desks or the tables as desks.
Gotcha. And then I also wanted to understand more about the equipment that's required. Maybe you can like tell us the story since 2003, and you're adding locations, but you're also adding different businesses and maybe becoming more efficient. What is the equipment that you would argue is incumbent upon any coffee shop that needs to open, and how have you added to the collection of equipment that you now use to bring people their coffee?
Well, that's a fun question too. I mean, gear, I love motorcycles are like one of my absolute favorite things, which is hilarious that
One
that's
of my
not...
last questions, I just want you to see it here. What can you teach me about Italian motorcycles is waiting for you at the end.
Wow. And
Sorry
you
to throw
picked
you
Italian.
off.
That's perfect. But motorcycles have been such a big part of my life, and it's a big hobby as well, as coffee has been. So equipment in coffee has somewhat not replaced that love, but like equipment in coffee house is very similar. In fact, when you show your last question with the adjective of Italian motorcycles, I mean, that's the most, what we play with in espresso equipment as well is
Right.
Italian manufacturers, or at least design. Their design cues are taken from Italian designers, so I geek out about equipment. I love it. I get excited about it, but it's very simple. Like if I was going to open a coffee shop, I would need basically 5 pieces of coffee and espresso equipment.
Okay.
Then some refrigeration, tables and chairs.
What are the
some
5?
counter.
Can you take me through?
So the 5 pieces of equipment would be an espresso machine, a regular espresso grinder, a decaf espresso grinder, a coffee brewer, and a coffee grinder.
Okay. Relatively simple. And then how have you expanded since it, like, is that what you started with in the early days in 2003? And when
Yeah.
did you?
Absolutely crucial to have those minimally 5 pieces. We've done some experimentation with, obviously we do pour over coffee, manual brew, which we can use all of that equipment for, then just buy some drippers. But then we've also gotten interested in some of the robotic single cup pour over equipment. We were very early adopters of what was called Clover coffee brewing, which was started by Xander Nosler. He was the chief engineer, and Howard Schultz bought the company outside of Starbucks, but then kind of brought it into the Starbucks model for a while. That was really fun, but then there are competitors because Howard Schultz scooped that up. There were several other competitors that we've played with. We may have gotten a newer style of espresso machine that would allow for some adjustment of the pump pressure as the water is going through the coffee puck. But by and large, those are the 5 pieces of equipment. And if you don't have those, you probably aren't going to have a coffee shop or anything where you can make coffee delicious.
And then you've started to roast as well?
Correct. Yeah.
So what goes into that?
Within a year, we started roasting in our first retail store. And we first bought a very small commercial 1-pound coffee roaster and have upgraded 7 or 8 times since then. But basically, you would just need some bins, a roaster, somewhere to cup your coffee that's away from the roasting environment, so it won't affect your olfactory senses as much, and really dig in and taste that coffee. Maybe some more grinders if you're going to do it at a large scale.
Yeah. So, why and how did you move into the roasting of the beans so quickly? Because I'm also just thinking simplicity sake, right? Like, someone gets into a business and maybe they have kind of a core competency or a core arena in which they can be differentiated. And sometimes, it doesn't sound like going from hosting a coffee shop to roasting coffee is that much of a divergence or lack of focus, but sometimes that occurs in business generally. So just take me through that decision. It seemed to be going well enough that you would make that investment.
No, you're absolutely right. It is a distraction. And if I had been smarter when I started Commonplace, I probably wouldn't roast. If I had had like a business plan and tried to stick with that and had revenue projections and expectations of certain things, I would have been doing that. But really, it was just a coffee hobbyist that still really hadn't grown up. in a
Yeah.
lot of ways,
Love it.
especially in business, and loved coffee so much that I was just ridiculously curious. And one of my jobs, I actually did spend some time on a roaster. So, I was in the coffee world already, like feeling and touching, seeing, smelling coffee roasting. So it was a very natural thing for me to like want to do. It wasn't a part of the original plan. There wasn't really an original plan. But we did it, and almost immediately after turning the roaster on, firing up the coffee, and having a few examples of the coffee to actually showcase and talk to our regulars and our guests that were coming in, we had two people approach us to ask us to help them with their coffee programs. So, I
Wow.
mean, that pivot of roasting is really what started what is today. Our business model. If we hadn't done that within the year of opening, I don't know if we would have ever gotten into this segment at all. And maybe I would still be a single coffee house operator.
How did that unlock more? So we talked with Bill Saris from Saris Candies, and he talked about how one avenue is their wholesaling business, where they're providing the chocolate for someone else to do. They have the people that come directly into their store. They have the people that they're selling through retail. They have the kids that they're buying the pretzels through the school sales, and they have these kind of differentiated revenue streams that make the business a little bit more anti-fragile, give it a kind of maybe higher upside, arguably. It sounds like that was the start of that for what you built.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, diversifying was amazing. Again, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just serving people coffee, got excited about roasting, got into that. And then I found myself now trying to care for other people's businesses as much as my own. I wasn't thinking about the fact that it was kind of, uh, I don't know, what's the word? Somewhat bulletproofing. I don't know what's the word because it's not bulletproof.
I'd say anti-fragile, maybe
Okay. Yeah,
diversifying. You
that's
could go in,
beautiful. Anti-fragile.
yeah.
Absolutely. Um, I didn't do that on purpose. It happened. And it happened as a result of me kind of, the curiosity was a part, but it was also realizing um, an opportunity that was unique in Western Pennsylvania as these years are unfolding. When you think about specialty coffee, in 2004 was the first time the concept third wave was spoken.
Can you explain what that means? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So that there was an actual pivot in specialty coffee to pay attention. The short answer is to pay attention more to the chemistry
Okay.
of coffee, rather than if the second wave was atmosphere and what I loved, table culture, human connectivity. If that was second wave, the third wave is let's pay attention more to coffee. So as I start roasting coffee, this opportunity happened in the segment of my business that was monumental. Um, and that's kind of beautiful, right? To think about like and cross compatible to how many other businesses. The point is, as we're roasting and we're paying attention to the shift in coffee, our competitors in this market in Western Pennsylvania as a whole, especially in roasting, there were a few players in retail coffee that were paying attention, but nobody, I'm going to cautiously say nobody, in the 2004, 5, 6 range, nobody was paying attention to that. Nobody was, as a roaster in Western Pennsylvania, definitely in Indiana, and I would argue even in Pittsburgh, was none of them were like really paying attention to that. So I had active people asking me questions, and it was something as simple as when I would get in the car after we started roasting and we started having a little bit of interaction in Pittsburgh, I would just take scales. I bought $10 or $15 digital scales online, and I just had 50 of them in a case in the back of my car. And I would go to a coffee shop expecting they didn't have a scale. In 2003 and 4, or a little earlier, most coffee shops in Pittsburgh were volume measuring their drip coffee to water ratio in a brewer, right?
Okay.
When you measure by volume coffee, their density is different in each bean. The grind size will always be different, potentially, if you're doing different brew methods. So there's no way to accurately measure the amount of coffee to water ratio with volume. So just bringing a scale in. So third wave coffee is really just the exploration of getting behind the bar in a coffee bar and really digging into the science, the craft, the chemistry of the coffee. And thankfully, we just at an opportune time started roasting, paying attention to that, and our market was hungry for it, or thirsty. We should say thirsty for it.
So
under-caffeinated for it.
Not for long. So in the effort, so we talked about there being 9 locations. We talked about you being on this specific wave of being cognizant to these things that other players weren't. I hear your kind of passion for this. It's very apparent to anyone listening the depth of knowledge that you have just from the experiences and the kind of mindfulness and the focus that you bring to this specific domain. And I've spoken with a gentleman who runs an Italian restaurant in town, and what he talked about being a struggle was that back home in Italy, someone working in a restaurant, having a career in the restaurant business, is completely normalized, celebrated at like a cultural level. It kind of gets the thumbs up from, hey, that's what you're doing with your life. Fantastic.
Interesting.
But what he has struggled with as someone who is an immigrant to the United States is that for many people, working in a restaurant is something of a way station. I'm doing this because I'm trying to break into acting. I'm doing this while I get through college. I'm doing this while, and this kind of this presupposition that it is one of the early lily pads on a lifetime of many. And when I hear the importance and the severity and the seriousness with which you take this, it's not to say that someone couldn't learn that if they weren't seeing it as one of their lily pads, the same way that your past experiences in the coffee business serve there. But it does presuppose a degree of mindfulness and earnestness and focus that might not always be the case with someone who is kind of in a more way station type of frame of mind. So when you think about expanding to these different locations and finding someone who is going to be responsible for maintaining the consistent ratio of water to bean weight as it goes through your machines that you've invested in these locations you've invested in, how are you ensuring that that standard is upheld when you're jumping around to all these different places?
Wow, I thought you were going somewhere else with the kind of status feel as a restaurateur in Italy versus the United States. So now I'm in a different shift. That was really fun, by the way. How do we ensure? I mean, one of the hardest things for me, and this actually almost was I had a few kind of closing challenges I wanted to share with everyone today, and one of them was about this very notion. It was very difficult for me, especially because I was not planning to be a business guy, right? I was planning to actually be in academics. It was very hard for me to know how to manage and to be a good leader, and I failed miserably often. And that was a very difficult thing for me when I would start a project and I would have a ton of energy and get so excited, and then when I would go to pass the baton off to someone, wow, that was, sometimes I didn't offer the baton soon enough. Sometimes I'd offer it but not let go. Sometimes there wouldn't be anyone there and I'd drop the baton, and the employees are like, what's going on? Who's leading us here? Yeah. Right? So the answer to your question is finding amazing people that share your passion and share core values, or at least are willing to align themselves with your core values, equipping them to do the job that you don't have the time to do, that you've kind of created a job for in doing what you love to do, and then letting them lead, letting them actually do it. That was a really hard thing for me. I wouldn't have been able to say it in the moment. I thought I was letting them lead, but so often I would come in and try to course correct something that it was all my fault. I didn't teach well. I didn't help train them well. And then I'm mad at them for not executing on the level that I never shared my expectations with. So that's been a really tough thing for me to learn as someone that wasn't prepared to do this, had no expectation of growth and scaling, and then having to find these key people that would love the product as much as I do, love the guests as much as I do, love their fellow employees and the vendors, and think about where the coffee came from as much as I do.
So maybe we can divert towards that direction you thought I was going from the status conversation, which is another thing that that restaurateur said was basically, the notion of hospitality is not only kind of arguably more revered, but it does carry with it a certain status that is not always present in this specific American culture. And what I've always sensed, I told you this before we started recording, is, Hannah and I both love going to Commonplace, getting a coffee there. My wife and I love going there on the weekends. Like it is something that, 18 years in, you have at least one rabid fan who's vocalizing that other people should go check it out if they haven't already. And part of that is because of the sense of hospitality that you get when you walk in there. You said it from the beginning, the across the table, the conversation, but the general welcomeness with which every employee on your team that I've interacted with greets me with every time I come in there. So maybe I'll just open a door there and you can riff a little bit on the status idea or anywhere else that your mind went before that my question didn't open before previously. Sheesh.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to go like 15 different ways with that. I mean, it is a really fascinating question. I love the fact that I get to say so often when I'm in a room where I'm obviously not, I don't want to say obviously not, feel like I should obviously not be there, maybe with like people as I would describe them as a little bit higher up on the status chart than I am. I love being able to say, oh, I just do coffee, and I love the reactions like your friend described where people would say to me, oh, well, what's next? I've had people in my own shop say that to me. Like, oh, what are you going to do when you grow up? I've had people say, or what are you planning to do next? Or, and it doesn't bother me at all. Like, so I'm kind of the wrong person to talk to about that because I think it's kind of fun. I'm so ridiculously happy. I am making more money than I thought I would make when I was in academia, which isn't a ton still, but I get to spend time with my family. I get to spend time with humans. So I don't really care about that part of it.
Do you think there's also a degree, though, to which it is the opportunity because it gets overlooked by folks like that, or would you not buy that notion?
I really don't know. Like, that's such a great question. I really don't know why food and beverage, hospitality, restaurant, coffee shop, some of my employees make more money than I do. If they're in the right store, getting working the right shifts with tips, they can easily make more money. So it's not about a money thing, right? It's what are we expecting? Are we expecting more suit wearing? Are we expecting more of a job title? I really don't know what the expectation. I know it exists, but I don't know why. I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah, I think that to agree that there's some degree of to be the one being served just is where you think about like the cultural memes. You talked about like a movie or something.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Usually the camera is transfixed on, there's a reason The Help was like a very kind of specifically different genre of movie because it wasn't so focused exclusively on those that were being served. James Bond is always getting the martini made, not necessarily making the martini for everyone.
The hero is not coming out from behind the bar.
Exactly.
It's funny. It's interesting.
I also wanted to, so I was reading the accountability report that you guys did for last year, and maybe we can just start at a 101 level, just explain for folks that might not be familiar what the definition of fair trade coffee is, why it's important, and then we can talk a little bit about the specific efforts that you've made in that regard.
And you're going to ask me that knowing that I will probably be somewhat critical of fair trade?
Yeah, this is a learning opportunity for
Cool. Well, one of my favorite parts that came out of the traceability report is that we found out we were paying much higher prices than fair trade prices. And that's our average. That's not on, obviously one of our coffees would have been more expensive, but on our average is more expensive than, or the price is higher than what we would have paid for fair trade priced coffee. And there are a few different criticisms, and some even refer to the status notion we just talked about in regard to food and beverage versus maybe in the tech industry in the United States, or elsewhere in the world. In the coffee growing world, a fair trade certified farmer may feel different than a non-fair trade certified farmer. And that's a little bit of a misnomer. You would have to co-op your coffee with other farms to be in the fair trade group. But if you were in fair trade, you're obviously getting a higher price, and that could create kind of an odd societal structure issue. But from my standpoint, fair trade price with coffee tracks the C market, the coffee commodity market, and it gives a before a harvest is found, or a harvest has yielded, the fair trade industry will negotiate a price with a co-op, a grouping of farmers, over the C market price to guarantee them more than commodity price for their coffee.
Okay.
But they'll do that before the harvest yield. The problem is, all during that time of harvest, the coffee market is in fluctuation, and fair trade will not match that fluctuation change. So what we did in our traceability report is uncover that enough of the coffees that we are actually either boots on the ground connecting with farmers and able to pay them much higher prices because we see the value, the core value in that coffee, its quality, its story, etc. We can pay more for that coffee than they could ever dream to get with fair trade, or obviously through the commodities market. Now, some of the farmers' coffee will have to trade at that lower end because not all of your coffee is going to reach what is called specialty grading. And if it's not reaching that mark, then they have the opportunity to sell it for less money. But anything above that quality standard, the market should be the judge, in my opinion, on how high the coffee can go. And if a farmer's done an incredible job, we want to reward that farmer. And if we've had a couple of successful crops from a farmer, we want to then engage them for years and promise that we'll be there to pay them. And that's one of the things that we uncovered with the traceability report, that we're doing far better than we thought we were. And this was our first time doing that.
And is that so is the mechanism that you just explained of, re-engaging with them, getting some sort of advanced order in place, also how you ensure, basically, I don't want to say you're bidding against yourself, but basically
100% we're bidding against ourselves, but bidding for ourselves long term.
Yeah.
Because there will be times, this is an agricultural product, we may have 2 or 3 harvests from a farm that blow our minds, right? And then quality starts to go downhill, not because the farmer hasn't done something. Maybe it was there wasn't as much rain, or maybe they had a light frost a couple times on these trees. We're still going to buy that coffee though, and that's bidding against ourselves in some senses, and we might sometimes increase our cost to the farmers. But long term, we're creating a sustainable relationship with these folks to then be able to, in Pittsburgh and beyond, share an amazing coffee, an amazing story with someone that you may be able to drink their coffee for 10 plus years, which is really fun.
Yeah. And if they have, and I could be completely off here, but if they have the right techniques, if they have the right beans, if they have the right people and all that to give you that high capacity for high end, then you're basically, it's almost like an insurance policy that will continue to exist in the future.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Tell me about designing. So we talked about this at the beginning, but I just want to go a little bit deeper on it. The way I've described before I knew you, and it perfectly fits now that I've met you, that you would create such a place. But I've said that Commonplace is a place with soul. You walk into certain corporate restaurants or coffee shops or what have you, and it feels like you are walking through a cookie cutter, which can be really well designed. It's not that there wasn't design and aesthetic choices made, but man, I've been to New York, Poughkeepsie, LA, and Hong Kong, and they all look exactly the same to some degree. And you walk into certain places that have been designed almost in an exclusive, mindful way, and there's a different feeling when you walk in the venue. So how does one accomplish that? As someone who wants to accomplish that with my own spaces now and in the future, what advice can you give me?
Wow, I don't know. I guess, like, if there is a design with Commonplace, historically it's been anti-design.
Okay, interesting.
Which I don't know. I don't even know what that means. I just know that, we were acquiring lived-in spaces, either formerly coffee housed or otherwise lived-in spaces and we were kind of trying to make it our own. Um, that's, I don't know, that's such a fascinating conversation too. Just I absolutely, in fact, later this evening, I have a training with one of our staffs about this very notion of how space translates to guests walking into the space. And it's always baffling to me, and I'm going to talk about this tonight, at how you can walk into a space as a guest, as a customer, as a first timer, and you can almost feel a manager or an owner. You can feel their presence, like what they were doing. Um, I don't know how to translate that. I don't know how to take, like, what was the magic thing that happened to
Yeah.
make this work, other than the fact that as we have gone into spaces, we have been tireless, sweaty, tired in trying to, like, figure out what's going to happen here. What are we doing here? How are we going to spend time here? And then over time, as we're letting, the doors are unlocked and now people are coming in, we're engaging with them and we're responding to their needs, and we're being kind of, in a way, and I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but like authentically ourselves, right? Like we never had the capital to do this, but we haven't gone to an architect or a formal design company to say, all right, what's the trend right now? What lighting do I need? In fact, if there's one thing Commonplace has failed on, it's lighting. It's terrible. Sometimes I'm in there, I'm like, how do people read in here? So we could use help on that. But maybe if we got too much help, then it wouldn't feel as, what's the word to use? Soulful? Soul? Man, you've gotten me like deep in my core like 6 times during this conversation.
That might be a new PR.
So, way to go. I feel known.
Yeah. Well, it's trying to think of the right word for it, but you when you interface with someone's life's work, and I have a very good family friend by the name of Henry Thorne, who makes these robotics products for kids. He was the co-founder of Four Moms and some other associated products, and he takes you through one of these pieces of machinery that he has put his brain and sweat and soul, just like you said, into designing, and you just consume it in a different way. It's clear that this was not just thrown off the shelf here. Someone has put an exorbitant amount of effort into it. And there's something to us as humans that when you commune with anything like that, regardless of whether or not you are an expert in coffee shops, an expert in baby appliances, there's something to just the feeling of being in the presence of craftsmanship. I think it's why people talk about the documentary Hero Dreams of Sushi, which is, even if you're not a sushi fanatic, you watch someone pour that much of themselves into something that is, on the surface, seems relatively simple, and there's just something timeless about that.
I was just asked by one of my staff who's doing some work in our kind of marketing and communications area in Commonplace, and she asked for me, and I forget what the project is. At some level, we're going to be referencing the original store, and your question just made me think of my answer to her when she said, will you describe it again? Will you describe the original store again? When we walked into that space, it had been a coffee house, and it was in pretty rough shape. The roof was leaking through the ceiling, and there were 3 little puddles in the space, which was interesting. And the shop had started in 1994, and it had like yellow and pink sponge paint on the walls, and it was getting dated, right? It felt old. And the way I described it in the answer to Abby was, I said, when we walked in, I was in love with this space, not because it was lovable, but because I loved it. And I saw like the future potential in what we were going to try to build there. And through that love, it became lovable. Like, people started to get excited about that space, not because it was in a great location. I mean, our original location, if you haven't visited it, please do, because you'll be like, how in the world did if I was working with someone opening a coffee house, I would tell them not to open here.
Wow.
It's up a flight of stairs to the right in the back of a strip mall, not in a close proximity to the university at IUP. It's down the hill. So if you come down as a student, you've got to go back up a hill. And it's got a great parking lot. There's some perks, right? It's a weird building. But we loved it. And which you'll find out very soon in the next chapter of your personal life, what that means. Because there's a lot of reasons to not love a newborn child, but you love it. And it's incredible.
I cannot wait.
Sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about personal stuff.
No, that's okay.
Edit, Hannah.
I want to ask about 2 last things, and then we'll aim towards wrapping up here. I feel like I could do this for hours. Hopefully we will again sometime soon.
Sounds fun.
But before we get to our standard last questions, have you heard of Bottomless? No?
I don't think so. What is it?
So it's a smart Wi-Fi connected scale someone puts in their home, and I have this in my house. You put your coffee bag on top of the scale.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then it auto ships.
Who is this? I know this
when the
person.
scale, Michael Meyer?
Not Mike Meyer.
Not Mike Meyer.
No, I heard they got some attention over the pandemic, right?
They definitely did well.
Yeah.
They like had some crazy customer growth. They raised a round from YC in a follow along seed round.
Oh wow!
And are doing relatively well. But I don't know if you haven't.
Yeah. I understand the concept. Yeah, sorry, I forgot.
Yeah. So is that the type of thing that you would consider plugging into? Is that not your bag? Like, what's your thought when you see that in like the general coffee industry?
Did you just say, is that not your bag after we said Mike Myers?
Yeah.
Do you get that reference?
Did you have a bag over his head?
No.
No, what's the reference?
That's when it was the first Austin Powers movie when he's being let out of jail.
I'm missing the reference completely.
Wow, that's funny. I just watched this with my kids, and I have an 11-year-old and 17-year-old and one in between, and I accidentally let my 11-year-old watch this. It was too soon.
Yeah, it seems like it would be.
That's funny, and a good pun about just coffee bag too, right?
Yeah, that's what I was actually aiming
So
for.
are you asking from the standpoint of Bottomless being a subscription that is mindful of your quantity? Like, would I get into that, or would I get into just subscription in general?
Bottomless, it's a startup. It is mindful to your quantity. It's making sure his big thing is there is a tangible difference between fresh roasted beans and beans that are not so fresh roasted, as I'm sure you're cognizant of. And he's talking about
actually, I mean, there's a lot of research right now that's showing. I mean, we do know for sure that a lot of what is intense about coffee is lost within, or not within, but around day 13, 14.
Okay.
But there is some research being done right now on aging coffee after roasting. You know, we've had experientially just ourselves. We've had an example where we've had natural processed Ethiopians that on day 40, day 50 are incredible in different flavors that you would ever have had during that within month. But that's a side point. I love the fact that they're trying to help the consumer be mindful of their quantity and things like that, and pay attention to potentially some of the coffee science. So I'm not against it. I do have like a bit of an allergy to, and this is probably a downfall of mine as an entrepreneur, but I'm a little bit hesitant to tell you when to buy again. We do have a subscription right now, and you can cancel any time, and we're, fire us, man. If we suck, fire us, like don't keep buying. So I think I have a little allergy there to just, because it's automatic, right? When you set how low your bag gets.
I'll get a ping. It says, hey, it looks like you're low.
Oh, okay.
We'll send it
so
to you
still
tomorrow.
have to make a volition.
It's saying, unless you say otherwise, we're just going to send you the
doing it.
next one.
Okay.
Because I think the consumer that they're trying to empathize with is someone who is juggling a lot in their life,
Too busy,
wants
yeah.
the good coffee, and is like, I don't want to like have 2 days where I just don't have a bag because
Right.
I forgot to order it or whatever the thing may be. My life had those fluctuations. I think that's who they're tailoring it to. And the analogy they've used is it's streaming for stuff. So you stream your Netflix video. It's like, I want it now, and that's when it loads, as opposed
Right.
to having the whole hard drive of videos. And so for your things, let's have less in the pantry. Let's have less stuff, going bad on shelves, and have it more get there when we need it type of framework.
That's interesting. I'd love to explore that Netflix meets coffee analogy some more.
Yeah.
And the expectation of a consumer. Maybe that's why cups of coffee will never go away,
Never.
because that's the way. It's almost an immediate way for me to see the similarity, but it's very fascinating how their subscription model is working. I like it.
Yeah. And then my last question, I teased it early on, Italian motorcycles. Tell me what's up.
Oh man.
Teach me something.
There is nothing like hitting an apex of a turn on a V-twin Ducati. It's incredible. The torque of a Ducati mixed with its just silk smoothness is unmatched. So, Ducatis hit my heart from that standpoint and aesthetically as well. And all things Italian, really. Moto Guzzi, sky's the limit. I don't know. I just have a ton of respect for that craft and what goes into it. So often I walk up to a motorcycle and I just can't imagine. I think about the number of ingredients it takes to make a cup of coffee and to create a coffee business. It's interesting, right? But like to have everything composed for a motorcycle to actually work, it's pretty amazing. But I just have a blast on it. I love it. I can't get over it. The aesthetics of an Italian motorcycle are unreal. So
Right.
if you're ever wanting an experience, let me know. I love everything from very slow scooters to way too fast than I should be going motorcycles.
I'm
So
more on the slow scooter side,
love
if I'm
it.
being candid.
I probably have more fun on my scooters than I do on my motorcycles. It's quiet, it's easy.
Yeah.
Having a cup of coffee, we probably shouldn't say this on air, but with a scooter, you don't have to clutch and change gears. So having a cup of coffee on a really slow scooter is like,
I think that's reasonably chill. We're not telling people to go base jump.
do
or
not
something.
do it though. But it's fun, especially in a slow town like Indiana.
Yeah.
Having a slow scooter on a Sunday afternoon in Indiana is like one of the best things. Just get lost in the woods for a little while.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have to go check out the Indiana location here and see.
Actually, you can right now and win a prize.
Oh yeah.
Did you follow the Coffee Quest?
I
It just launched 2 days ago.
tell the good people about it.
Only 5 of our locations are included, but the Indiana location is included. If you visit all 5 and you make a social media post, that you get a little sticker saying that you've been there, and you post about which location you got that sticker. If you fill out all 5, you're entered to win a grand prize, which is actually pretty nice. And you have one choice in
A
the grand.
Ducati.
I wish a Ducati. We should work on that. As much as I talk about Ducati, they should be hanging out with us.
Yeah.
But along with other nice prizes, you can pick either an hour of training at our headquarters or an hour with me to have coffee. That's part of the grand prize, which we have an inside bet at our HQ that no one's going to pick me. That's my side of the bet. And if someone picks me, then I owe HQ staff trams for lunch and vice versa. If people don't pick me, then I get lunch paid for at trams.
Nice.
So.
Well, I have a lot of baby prep and house renovation work to be done, but I wouldn't be surprised if Hannah takes a swing at that raffle for winner. For folks that want to learn more, check out all the things that you guys are doing. Can we provide some digital coordinates where people can learn more about you and about Commonplace?
Yeah, commonplacecoffee.com is easy. We're on Facebook and Instagram. I think there's a little bit of presence on TikTok, although that's a fascinating experience to go down the TikTok rabbit hole. I'm brand new with it, so I'm still baffled. LinkedIn a little bit. Or, reach out to us through the website and just pick a time to come to our facility. Love to show you what's going on.
Right on. Strongly recommend it. Going to link all that goingdeepertherein.com/podcast for every single episode of the show. It's also in the podcast app where you're probably listening to this right now. But before we let you go, TJ, I'd like to give you the mic one final time to issue an actionable personal challenge to the audience.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sure.
All right. This was tough. So for those of you that don't know, Commonplace Coffee got its name from Walt Whitman, a poem in Song of Myself called The Commonplace. And the poem, not only did we steal the name, but it just so embodies who Julie and I strive to be and hope to live our lives every day. So Walt Whitman's a huge part of my life and has affected me deeply. And as I was trying to think of something to share today, I thought of this small segment of Song of Myself from 51. And it says, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." And I remember one of the first times I read this, like being just struck at how complicated we can be as humans. And especially now, it seems that this is a very timely message of reading this in the context of how you engage with others. So the challenge I'd like to kind of share with myself included is to be gracious to one another.
That is the perfect note to wrap up on, because we all need a little grace. I ask for grace every single day. Beautiful. TJ, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. I love talking with you.
It was my pleasure.
We just went deep with TJ Fairchild. Hope you're not there. Has a fantastic day.
Hey, thank you so much for watching to the end of my conversation with TJ. If you are a coffee fanatic, want more coffee-related interviews, then you simply must check out our past interview with Michael Meyer, the co-founder and CEO of Bottomless. You heard me talk about it earlier in the video. They measure the weight of your coffee bag and send you a new one when you're running low so that your coffee is always fresh. I'm a subscriber. It's awesome. You'll enjoy it the same way you enjoyed this interview.